Welcome to Illuminating the Path with Professor Douglas Petrovich. Today, I have a special treat for you. This video is part of a new series entitled 5 of the Top. So we're going to look at various things in this playlist, and I'll choose among all the possible options at least 5 that can be viewed somewhere in or near the top. This first time, we're going to look at 5 of the top archaeological finds from the ancient city of Lachish. The site of Lachish is located strategically in the southern Shvela, perfectly positioned to guard the southernmost east to west travel artery that goes from the coastal plain in the west to the central mountain spine in the east. Controlling Lachish protected the inhabitants of the hill country from attack by any bad actors from the lower elevations, especially people like the Philistines, who constantly were a threat to the Israelites. The tell is called Tel El Duir. During the middle of the second millennium BC, Canaanite Lachish was one of southern Canaan's largest cities. The final Canaanite city of Lachish, level 6 on the tell, which operated under Egyptian hegemony, was destroyed by invading sea peoples at the end of the Iron Age 1A. And the Iron Age 1A spanned from about 1187 BC to about 1130 BC. The Israelites did not occupy the city until level 5 of the Iron Age 2A, which spans from about 1000 BC to about 841 BC. The initial Israelite occupation coincided with their resettlement of the Shvela as a whole. Now, let's move on to the archaeological finds. Among 5 of the top archaeological finds at Lachish is a set of Canaanite temples. We will look at 3 temples, the first of which is the Foss Temple. The Foss Temple is situated on the northwestern slope of the tell in a foss, that is, a ditch or a moat-like depression that's located outside of the city's fortification walls. This is extremely rare to have a temple built and positioned completely outside of the city walls. In this image, notice the location of the outer and inner revetment walls. The Foss Temple sits well outside of both city walls, making it vulnerable to seizure by an enemy army that may come to Lachish to besiege the city and take it over, if not destroy it. The Foss Temple was discovered and excavated by a British expedition under a man named James Starkey in the 1930s, with the final publication of the excavations by a woman named Olga Kapnell in a volume called Lachish II, the Foss Temple, and that dates to 1940. The temple had 3 main building phases, all in the Late Bronze Age. Late Bronze Age 1B, 2A, and 2B, which equates to approximately 1484 BC to about 1187 BC. The Foss Temple produced a rich assemblage of artifacts, including imported Cypriot pottery and especially beautiful white flipware, as well as Egyptian-style scarabs, faience figurines, votive vessels, bronze items, ivory plaques, and animal bones from sacrifices. And the animals included are sheep, goats, and cattle. The temple showed evidence of continuous use and offerings, with some destruction by fire in its final phase, which equates to an Israelite destruction of the city late in the period of the Judges. This is one of the best preserved Canaanite temples in the entire Levant, illustrating local worship practices, trade connections with places such as Cyprus and Egypt, and ritual continuity over 3 centuries of use. Then, secondly, there's the Acropolis Temple, which sits on the highest part of the mound, the Acropolis, likely part of or adjacent to the Royal Palace complex during the Late Bronze Age. This temple would have been the one directly overseen by the king, which he probably would have used to consult the city's patron god, although even to this day, we don't really know what was the patron god of Lachish. The British team of Starkey and Tupnell excavated the temple, and David Lusishkin's renewed excavations interacted extensively with their findings, as documented in their 2004 book. Lusishkin identified it as a monumental temple of level 6. That again is Iron Age 1A, approximately 1187 to 1130 BC. Although older literature may call this period the Late Bronze Age 3. So some publications will use the term Iron Age 1A, Others will use Late Bronze Age 3. I prefer Iron Age 1A. The Acropolis temple likely served the royals and the elites, reflecting Egyptian cultural influence in the Iron Age 1A, when Lachish was a major Canaanite city-state with Egyptian oversight. This rectangular temple, with elements resembling Egyptian architecture, included an entrance chamber, a main hall that was about 16 by 13 meters, and a raised inner sanctuary or Holy of Holies. The design featured columns, side rooms, and possibly a raised platform. The cultic objects that were discovered there include altars, offering stands, figurines, some of which were in Egyptian style, imported pottery, and evidence of animal sacrifice. The temple's remains showed signs of destruction by fire and collapse around 1130 BC. And again, we would attribute this to a final destruction by the Israelites. And this would be the final occupational phase during which the Canaanites lived at the site. And then the third temple of this set of temples to bring to your attention is called the Northeast Temple. As you would expect, the Northeast Temple was built in the northeastern sector of the site, which is designated as Area BB by the archaeologists. This temple, which was discovered by a team led by Joseph Garfiegel, an Israeli archaeologist, who excavated there from 2013 to 2017, is attributed to level 6, representing the last Canaanite city at Lachish. It existed during most of the 12th century BC. The building is a modest, square-shaped temple with a central hall, side rooms accessed from the hall, 2 columns at the entrance, and a cella, also known as an inner sanctum or, in biblical terms, a Holy of Holies, with 4 supporting columns and standing stones that possibly represent deities. The artifactual finds related to worship in the Northeast Temple include cultic vessel, figurines, and evidence of offerings. For example, they found smiting god figurines, a silver sheet pendant depicting a nude goddess with a Hathor hairstyle. And of course, Hathor is an Egyptian goddess, and she has an equivalent in the Levant, and this is a goddess the Israelites constantly were worshiping, the goddess Asherah. And weapons and jewelry found beside the Holy of Holies, including an arrowhead, a dagger, and an axe head. The temple shared features with smaller Canaanite shrines. It has parallels to later designs used in Israel's first temple, such as its side rooms. In the main hall of the Northeast Temple, Room D, they discovered an inscription that was incised into the shoulder of a ceramic storage jar before firing. In other words, before the piece of pottery that was fashioned went into the kiln to be fired and have its final form. It was still wet, the clay. The excavators claim that this is a Canaanite inscription, but clearly, folks, this is not a Canaanite inscription. This is a proto-alphabetic Hebrew inscription, and we can see this clearly. Now, the inscription on this potsherd, known as the Lachish jar sherd, probably is not full. In other words, there's some letters missing because there was more writing on more of the surface of the pot. Sometime probably in antiquity, it was broken off, and therefore it's then lost and never recovered. But of the letters that do exist there, and they exist clearly in rows, so it's horizontal rather than vertical, several of these letters are very, very unambiguously identified as Hebrew alphabetic letters. For example, in the top row on the left side, you have a shepherd's crook or a shepherd's staff, and that's the Lamed letter. Then next to it, you have a Kaf. And then on the middle line, below that line, from left to right, you have 3 almost certain letters. The only one that's not 100% certain is the first one from the left, and that is a Ko. After it, the one in the middle is a Pei, and then the final one on the right is a Sonnet. The other letters, I'm fairly certain of what their identity is, but they're definitely arguable, so I won't even try to mention what those are. But this, folks, clearly is a Hebrew inscription. And this makes sense because lots of Hebrew inscriptions were found at the site of Lachish. It's absolutely replete with Hebrew alphabetic inscriptions when you compare it to other cities. The temple went out of use when Lachish was destroyed in a large conflagration, which is a destruction by fire, which was followed by lengthy abandonment until the foundation of the Judite city of level 5, the first Israelite occupation. So, these three temples represent part of Canaanite worship at the site of Lachish. Considering that there are multiple temples, and in a couple cases, temples used contemporaneously, clearly this is evidence of polytheism in vivid form. Fourth among 5 of the top archaeological finds at Lachish is the Assyrian siege ramp, which was constructed by the Assyrian army in 701 BC under the command of Sennacherib, king of the Neo-Assyrian Empire at the time. By this time, the Neo-Assyrian Empire had developed into the greatest and largest empire the ancient Near East ever had seen, at least up until this point, eventually conquering not only Mesopotamia, but also Elam to the east, Urartu to the north, the Levant to the west, and of course the Levant is the combination of the southern and northern Levant. The northern Levant has ancient Syria and ancient Phoenicia, whereas the southern Levant essentially is just the land of Canaan, later to be known as Israel. When Sennacherib ascended the throne in 705 BC, many of the foreign peoples under Assyrian control rebelled. He launched his first campaign in 703 BC to quell the rebellion in Babylonia that was led by a man named Marduk-Baladan II, a Chaldean chieftain, who, by the way, is mentioned in the Bible. His men were allowed to see the temple treasures. And of course, God used that as a sign that the Babylonians would be taking those treasures. Sennacherib's second campaign was launched eastward against the Kassites of the Zagros Mountains in 702 BC. He launched a third campaign to the west against the rebels of the Levant, and he made his way down the Mediterranean coast as he captured the Phoenician coastal cities on the way. Every once in a while, he would move inland a little ways to capture or destroy a non-coastal city, but primarily he was hunting the coast. From there, he continued southward down into Samaria and then into Judah. Sennacherib's account of his conquest of Judah is recorded on what is called the Taylor Prism, and he described his victories in his own terms. Here's what he said, quote, "As for Hezekiah the Jew, who did not submit to my yoke, 46 of his strong walled cities, as well as the small cities in their vicinity, which were without number, by scaling and by bringing up siege engines, by attacking and storming on foot, by mines, tunnels, and breaches, I besieged and took." That's from the third column of the Taylor Prism. The writer of 2 Kings essentially recorded this same event from the Judite point of view. It says this in 2 Kings chapter 18, verse 13. Now in the 14th year of King Hezekiah, Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, went up against all of the fortified cities of Judah and captured them. This text essentially validates Sennacherib's own account in his annals. One of the walled cities that he captured is Lachish, as the prophet Micah condemned this city in chapter 1, verse 13, for beginning the sin for the daughter of Zion, because they were guilty of the rebellious acts of the northern kingdom of Israel. In other words, God was prophetically, or through the prophet, accusing the people of Lachish of being guilty of the same sins that destroyed the northern kingdom. God put them off into captivity, the survivors that weren't killed by the Assyrians a couple of decades earlier. After Sennacherib conquered cities such as Timnah, Ekron, Azekah, and Gath, he came to Lachish. Rather than capitulate, the leaders of Lachish forced him to besiege their city. So he determined that the best strategy to conquer the people atop this mound was to build a siege ramp, and he did it against the southwestern corner of the city's outer revetment wall. Although he had no use of bulldozers at his disposal, his workers used earth and fill to build this ramp, and probably he relied, if not exclusively, then mostly, on slave labor. At the same time, Lachish's residents built a counter-siege ramp opposite from it, inside the wall, that is, inside the inner wall. This drawing, following from left to right, represents a portion of the longitudinal section at the southwestern corner of the temple, showing, number 1, the first stage of the siege ramp, number 2, the outer revetment wall, number 3, the second stage of the siege ramp, number 4, the inner wall, and number 5, the counter-siege ramp that was built by the Hebrew residents of Lachish. At the site, archaeologists discovered verification of the battle that took place. One form of this is swing stones that were found in the area of the southwestern corner of the outer wall at Lachish. Now, it's known that Assyrian soldiers often attack when they're besieging a city with slingshots and sling bullets. Archaeologists also found some bronze and bone arrowheads that belonged to the Assyrians that were found at the foot of the southwestern corner of the wall. The Assyrians eventually succeeded in completing their siege, and the residents paid a heavy price for failing to stop them. Amazingly enough, the Assyrian siege ramp has survived until today. And if you visit the site on a trip to Israel, you can see it for yourself. Seeing this living remnant at Lachish would give you a whole new appreciation for ancient warfare. Third among 5 of the top archaeological finds at Lachish is the series of Assyrian reliefs that Sennacherib mounted on the walls of his palace without rival that was his name for it, which he built at Nineveh. Sennacherib had moved to the capital of the empire, to Nineveh, from Dur-Sharrukin, which was the capital under his predecessor, Sargon II. Sennacherib accomplished this either in 705 BC or shortly after that. The king's craftsmen mounted these reliefs in the reception hall of the central palace, facing entering visitors who were granted an audience with the king. Because Sennacherib failed to conquer Jerusalem, he must have considered Lachish to be the most significant city that he had destroyed on this campaign. The destruction of Lachish, depicted at Nineveh, coincides with stratum 3 at Lachish, as dubbed by archaeologists, which is recognized universally by scholars of today. There is pretty much nobody who dissents on this. Stratum 3 equals the occupational level of the Judite people whose city was destroyed under the invading Assyrian army. The identification of the scene is confirmed by the inscription opposite from the king's face on one of the reliefs, which reads, Sennacherib, king of the world, king of the land of Assyria, sat on a throne. The booty of Lachish passed in front of him. Sennacherib observed the battle, but this scene shows that he could withdraw to the royal tent whenever he would grow weary or become bored. A scene on one relief depicts the Neo-Assyrian camp, which features tents, chariots, and support personnel within, and a slew of towers mounted around the perimeter. Other scenes depict the battle itself, including ladders leaning against the city wall, siege engines designed to break through the wall, Assyrian attackers on foot with spears and shields, Judite archers atop the towers raining arrows down on the attackers, Assyrian archers firing back at them, and a number of the defenders impaled on poles that had one end sharpened. In fact, this was the MO for the Assyrians. They were known best for killing people by impaling and then mounting those poles in the ground so that any survivors who would walk by would see and understand and realize you can't mess with the Assyrian army. They're just too vicious, too devastating, too powerful, and you will lose and end up dead in the process. One panel depicts Assyrian soldiers hauling away religious articles that they had plundered. Some panels show Judite survivors with knapsacks over their shoulders who are being led away into captivity. The scenes on the reliefs at Nineveh are a vivid and gruesome portrayal of the ugly side of war. God chose to judge his own people severely, even though Jerusalem survived the attack unscathed. It was a different story at Lachish. They had lots of pain to endure. Second among 5 of the top archaeological finds at Lachish is early alphabetic inscriptions, much earlier than the time period that we've just been looking at in the first millennium BC. Lachish is famous for its numerous early alphabetic inscriptions, and I will mention 2 of them here. Excavations in recent years have revealed 2 alphabetic Hebrew inscriptions from the 15th century BC. The earlier inscription of the 2 is known as the Lachish ivory comb, as it was composed on elephant tusk, which probably came from an African elephant and was traded on the open market. The inscription reads, "You stay unclean until it, that is, your hair, by using the comb, is separated into an orderly arrangement each day and is spread apart." I published a journal article in the Near East Archaeological Society Bulletin on this very inscription, entitled "A New Take on the Lachish ivory comb inscription, an ancient Hebrew cure for unclean hair. Since there is so much to say about this inscription, and since there is so much I want you to know about it, I will save the discussion of the details for a separate video. For now, I will add that it probably was composed by an Israelite in the desert during the 40 years of wandering after the Exodus, and that the ivory likely was part of their plundering of the Egyptians. The other early alphabetic inscription from Lachish that I want you to know about is called the Lachish Milk Bowl Ostracon. The LMBO for short was discovered just inside of the western side of the city's inner defensive wall. The writing surface is of potsherd, and when writing was added to a potsherd, it became an ostracon. The Lachish Milk Bowl Ostracon was touching burnt debris when it was discovered, signaling that it was deposited there when the city was destroyed by fire near the very end of the 15th century BC. The short text reads, "Servant in charge of honey." Essentially, this inscription is an ancient business card describing the role that this Hebrew served in Joshua's makeshift army, based on both its chronological context in ancient history and its context in biblical chronology. I also published an article on this inscription, which is entitled "A Hebrew Inscription from Joshua's Conquest at Lachish." It was published in Bible and Spade in 2022. By the way, both articles can be downloaded and read for free from my academia.edu webpage. All that you have to do is go to your favorite search engine, Google or whatever, enter in my full name, space, academia.edu, then we hit return, and it will bring up a link that will take you right to my page where you can find it. Since there is so much to tell you about the LMBO as well, I will save the rest for a video that's devoted to this inscription exclusively. I will add, though, that the importance of this inscription, or at least a major part of it, is its find spots being stratified, meaning that we know exactly when it was deposited there in the history of Canaan. And because of that, it supports the early Exodus view, which I hold, and which dates the Exodus to 1446 BC. And it helps to refute the late Exodus view, which dates the Exodus and the conquest to the 13th century BC. And usually they come up with a date of about 1260 BC for the date of the actual Exodus event. And now, first among 5 of the top archaeological finds at Lachish is the Lachish letters. The Lachish letters are a collection of ancient Hebrew inscriptions written in carbon ink on the surface of broken potsherds, meaning that these inscriptions also are ostracon, which is the plural form of the singular word ostracon. These letters represent one of the most important epigraphical discoveries ever made in ancient Judah, and they provide a rare, first-hand glimpse into the final days of the kingdom of Judah before its destruction by the Babylonians. Soon after Solomon died, back in the 10th century BC, the Lord divided the Israelite kingdom into 2 parts on account of Solomon's own sins. The northern, or Israelite kingdom, was wicked from the very beginning to the end, and they were killed or hauled off into captivity by the Neo-Assyrian Empire, beginning in 722 BC. The southern, or Judite kingdom, continued to survive much longer, but their sin also caught up to them. So God sent the Neo-Babylonian army to ransack Judah and burn down Jerusalem, including the destruction of the first temple, which Solomon had built from 967 to 961 BC. Neo-Babylonia's king, Nebuchadnezzar II, led the third and final wave of attack in 587 BC. During James Starkey's archaeological excavations at Lachish in January and February of 1935, his team discovered the primary group of 21 legible letters. They were found in a burnt layer near the city gate, inside of the gatehouse, and amid the debris from the Babylonian destruction of Lachish. Sturkey is pointing to the find spot in this black and white photo. The letters date to about 590 to 587 BC, during the reign of Zedekiah, the last king of Judah, in the years immediately before the Babylonian siege and destruction of Lachish and Jerusalem. They were written during the Neo-Babylonian campaign under Nebuchadnezzar II, who attacked Judah, including its fortified cities of Lachish and Azekah. It says this in Jeremiah: when the army of the king of Babylon was waging war against Jerusalem and against all of the surviving cities of Judah at Lachish and Azekah, because they remained as fortified cities among Judah's cities. Most of the ostraca reflect the tension and events related to the invasion, so they likely were written hastily in a time of crisis. Lachish was one of the final Judite cities to fall before Jerusalem fell. Most of the ostraca are letters, although some of them are lists or administrative notes. The best preserved ostraca are letters of correspondence between Judite military officers at different cities. One of the most well-known within the corpus is letter 4, part of which reads like this: also, let my Lord know that we are watching for the signals of Lachish, according to all the indications that my Lord has given, because we cannot see Azekah. This statement reflects the dire situation very well. Azekah's signal fire, which was a beacon system for communication between cities, kind of like in Lord of the Rings, had gone out, most likely because the city had fallen to the Babylonians. Lachish was isolated and next in line. Letter 4 also contains a use of the name that God gave to Moses and the Israelites as his covenantal name, and it's this: he goes on existing. I put the letters in red for you here. Letter 3 is extremely important on account of its reading of these words on the obverse. Now as for the letter of Tobiah, servant of the king, which came to Shallum, son of Yaddua, through the prophet, saying, beware, your servant has sent it to my Lord. This is one of the exceedingly rare first-hand writings that uses the word prophet, Nevi, the Hebrew word. Some scholars have attributed this reference to Jeremiah. Others believe that it was Uriah of Jeremiah 26, verses 20 to 23, while others are unsure. What's important is that it clearly attests to the existence of prophets in Judah during the time of the biblical authors. There you have it. Those are 5 of the top archaeological finds from Lachish. Thank you so much for watching with me. I do look forward to seeing you next time on Illuminating the Path. If you enjoyed the video, please be sure to like it and subscribe to the channel. So long for now.